And now may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. Well, we're almost halfway through the month of February, which means winter has to be ending soon, I would imagine. How are we doing? How are you doing getting through this winter? February is a tough month. It is tough. The daylight hours are short. The weather is cold and gloomy and mostly cloudy, and you just never feel like you're going to get warm or see the sunshine ever again. February can be tough. And we feel that. We feel that in our bones, I think. Somehow we kind of feel February. The gloom and the darkness, the cloudiness and the snow, we just kind of understand that. And it affects our moods, quite frankly. If you've got a lot of cloudy days in a row where you can't see the sun, there's nothing but cold and snow and slush, it can affect you. There's actually a scientific term for that: seasonal affective disorder, abbreviated, not surprisingly, SAD. And it just means when we get depressed, when the seasons change, and especially when we go into winter and we feel that cold and that cloudiness day after day after day. You know, I've lived in two of the cloudiest places in this country, Columbus, Ohio, and Lansing, Michigan. You look at any list of cloudiest places in the country, and Columbus and Lansing will be on there. And it does kind of do that to you a little bit. Just nothing but clouds. We need the sunshine. We need the sun to remind us of the warmth and of the better times that are coming. And when we don't get the sunshine, when it's nothing but clouds and gloom day after day after day, who wouldn't get a little gloomy as well? We need the light. And that's what our readings are reminding us of this morning. Both Isaiah in the Old Testament and from Matthew in the New Testament, that we need the light. The light in this case, of course, is Jesus. He is the eternal light that we depend on. Jesus is the light of the world. It says that quite clearly in John 1, verse 4. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. That is referring, of course, to Jesus, the light of all mankind. Jesus is that light. Now, when we become a believer in Jesus, when we become a follower of Jesus, we live with that light in us. We have that light. We are not the life, or rather the light itself, but we have that light living in us. And that's what we see in our reading this morning. If you go back to Matthew chapter 5, verse 14, Jesus says this very clearly. You are the light of the world, not the eternal light, that's Jesus, but we are living with his light in us, and because of that, we are now the light of the world. So now, Jesus is the eternal light. We let that light in us, in this world. So the question then becomes, what are we going to do with that light? What are we going to do with the light of Jesus? And I believe there are three choices we have, three responses we can make. First and foremost, anyone can refuse the light of Jesus. We can simply refuse to accept it. These are the non-believers, of course, the people that don't want to follow Jesus for whatever reason. whether they see him as a myth or a fairy tale, or whether it's just too inconvenient for them to follow because he's interrupting their lives as they want to live them, or for whatever reason, Jesus offers his light to all people, we know for a fact that many will refuse it. They have refused the light of eternal salvation. Listen to what's written here in John 3, verse 19. Light has come into the world. Of course, the light referring to Jesus. Light has come into the world, but people loved darkness instead of the light. They loved the darkness because they wanted to hide their evil deeds. There are some people who would prefer to live in the darkness of their own sin. That is, they've looked at what Jesus has to offer and they said, no thanks. I prefer to live my life my way. I'm going to keep going down this road. My desires, my wants, I don't care how self-destructive it is. I don't care where that road takes me. I'm going down it. I'm going to be in control. They would rather live in the darkness than surrender to the light. They refuse the light of Jesus. That's one option, to refuse. The second would be to hide it. And that's what Jesus warns against in Matthew in our New Testament reading this morning. Don't hide your light. Don't put it under a bowl. You're not supposed to do that. Well, if we are faithful followers of Jesus and we have his light living in us, why wouldn't we want to let it shine? Why would we want to put it under a bowl? Again, there's all kinds of reasons for that. Chiefly, I believe, would be fear and embarrassment. Fear and embarrassment. Because Jesus himself said that we would be ridiculed and mocked on account of our faith, that telling others about Jesus would open us up to scorn, that we would be persecuted on account of his name. And so it's just a lot easier to keep it quiet. And I know for a fact that everyone here, including myself, there's been some time in our life where we had the opportunity to tell someone about Jesus and didn't do it because it was either inconvenient or potentially embarrassing. What if I tell somebody about Jesus and they get angry? What if they call me names? What if they make fun of me? We've all been there. That's hiding your light. That's putting your light away. And that's what Jesus is warning us not to do. As difficult as it is, he has warned us we simply cannot do that. Listen to what Paul writes. This is from Romans 1, verse 16. I am not ashamed of the gospel, Paul says, for it is the power of God to salvation to anyone who believes. I am not ashamed of the gospel. Just the very need that Paul has to write that down suggests that there are some people who are ashamed. And again, we can't be. Because as Paul says in that very verse, it is the power of God to salvation for who believes. Don't we want to share that? Don't we want to save as many people as possible? Don't we want to share the word of hope and grace and mercy with other people? We cannot hide our light under a bushel. We can refuse it, we can hide it, or our third choice is what Jesus is calling us to do. We can share it, and we can shine, and we can let our light shine before others. But that comes with something of a qualification. What does it mean to let your light shine before others? And if you look at our readings this morning, there seems to be an implication there. Go back to Isaiah, verse 10. And if you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness. That's an if-then statement. Your light will rise if you do these things. Well, what are they? To spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed. And then go back to Matthew. In the same way, from verse 16, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds. Letting our light shine is not just simply a matter of coming to church and telling other people we believe in Jesus and showing it with our mouths. There is an action that goes with it. The light in us is accompanied by action. Apparently, there are good deeds involved. Now, this is where a lot of people get confused. The good deeds that we're talking about are not what get us into heaven. They don't. We can't earn our way into heaven. We can't do enough good things to get into heaven. What gets us into heaven alone and only is our faith in Jesus. But, and this is an important but, those good works are evidence of the faith that we have. How do we know we have faith? How do we know we are letting our light shine? It is the good deeds we are doing because we have faith. The evidence of our faith. James said in James 2:17 that faith without works is dead. That's the same point. It's not that the good works get you to heaven. It's the faith that gets you to heaven. But the faith is evidenced by the good works that you do and the light that you let shine. And that's why Jesus in Matthew 25 is talking about the sheep on one hand and the goats on the other, and the goats are going to the place of eternal darkness. And they cry out, Lord, Lord. And he says, begone, because you didn't clothe me when I was naked, or feed me when I was hungry, or visit me when I was in prison. And they say, Lord, when did we not do those things? And Jesus says, whatever you do not do to the least of mine, you do not do to me. There are many people who will cry out, Lord, Lord, who will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Letting our light shine means producing the good fruit in accordance with our faith. And going out and visiting the sick and those in prison and feeding the hungry and doing all those things, not because we want to get into heaven or think those can get us into heaven, but as a product of the faith that we have, a product of the light that is shining within us. Don't hide your light. Send it out into the world. It does no good for you to light your light here in this congregation every Sunday, and this is as far as it goes. That light was meant to be taken out into the world so that others may see it and see the love of Jesus. I read a story from a few years ago that took place in one of the Russian republics, Tatarstan, I believe. And it was a story about some secretive cult living there. And they spent all this time underground. They had essentially been living underground. This secret cult, don't ask me why, but they did. And there were children living down in this cult that had never seen the light of day. Ever. Never seen the light. We need the light. Others need the light. Everyone needs the light. Not just in a physical sense of sunshine and warmth, but the light of all eternity, the light of all mankind, Jesus Christ. We cannot live without him, and more importantly, a dying world that is sitting in the darkness cannot live without him either. Do not hide your light under a bushel. Do not hide it, but put it on its lampstand, and let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Amen.